Please be seated. The court is back in session. We would like to give the floor to Nguyen Chi's defense to put questions to this witness. You may proceed. Sonarun. Good afternoon, Mr. President, Your Honors. Good afternoon, Mr. Ieng Pan. My name is Sonarun, the defense counsel for Nguyen Chi. You have responded through several questions put to you by both the prosecution and the lead co-lawyers. And I have some questions for you. This morning you testified through the questions by the prosecution and the lead co-lawyers regarding the military structure. Since the beginning of the trial, we have several former Khmer Rouge commanders, military commanders who testified before this court. However, there is still uncertainty through the military structure of the Khmer Rouge, and it seems that you are pretty clear on the structure. However, I'd like to clarify further regarding your situation, what role you had when you started to join the military until the rank of the divisional level, if you can recall it. Answer. Thank you for your question. I will briefly respond to your question. As I stated this morning, I joined the army on the 28th of August 1970, rather July 1970. And initially, when I joined, I was part of the militia of the Ong Tasam commune in Tramkot district. And then I joined the district military forces of Tramkot district, which the code name District 105. And then I joined the sector military force in Takao, that is sector 13. And I remained with the district military force and the sector military forces. I was the commander of a battalion, and that was in 1971. And in 1972, I joined the sector military forces, and I still remained the commander of a platoon. And then I was promoted from a platoon to a company, and by 1974, that is in December 1974, I was promoted to become the commander of the Special Battalion 203, attached to Brigade number 2 in the Southwest Zone. And later on the 10th in 1976, after the liberation, I left the Special Battalion, and then I became the regimental commander, still under Brigade number 2. And after the 17th April 1975, I was still in charge of a regiment stationed at the border, as I stated this morning. And later on, there were clashes with Vietnam during 1977 and 1978. And as I testified this morning, after I left Takao, I was a regimental commander, but in Svay Rieng, I became the commander of an intervention brigade, 221. So I was gradually promoted, and that was the military structure through my experience, starting from platoon to company, battalion, regimental level to brigade. And of course, I was rather familiar with the divisional commander. As I stated, in Svay Rieng there were 5 brigades, which composed of a division. And I was one of the commanders of the 5 brigades in Svay Rieng. This is my brief response. Thank you for your response, and allow me to ask you further regarding the division. During the Democratic Cambodia regimes, how many military divisions there were? Answer: I cannot know the overall structures of the divisions. I only knew about the division while I was in Svay Rieng. I cannot know how many divisions there were under the general staff. I only knew that in the Southwest Zone there were 2 brigades, and later on it was expanded to 4 brigades. And in Svay Rieng there were 5 brigades which formed a division. Thank you. Question: this morning you talked about division. How many brigades that form a division? Answer: during the Democratic Cambodia regime, there were 5 brigades which made up a division, and that included an intervention brigade. And that was based on the Chinese military structure. For the U.S. structure, in fact, a division is made up of 4 brigades. There is no additional intervention brigade as in the Chinese structure. Thank you. Question: during your preparation to attack the Pojantong airport, in your spearhead, and that was your main target, I meant the airport, as you stated before this call this morning. When did you control the airport itself? What day was it? Answer: we attacked the Pojantong airport during the night of the 16th. Question. You were part of the special force, and during your attack, was the situation difficult or was it easy for you to control the situation? Answer. I already stated that this morning the front line of the battlefield was in fact in this area, that is in Kontuk, but my special forces were to infiltrate and to fight from the back, that is behind the enemy. So we made a sudden attack in order to gain a sudden victory, and if we could not succeed, it means we would leave our dead bodies behind. However, luckily we were lucky because we attacked a weaponry or ammunition warehouse and it was exploded, and then it caused the confusion amongst the enemy, and then the infantry took control. Question. So it means that your attack and victory was not that difficult to achieve at the time. During the time that you supervised your force and attacked Pojantong Airport, if I am not mistaken, you were in charge of a special brigade. Is that correct? Answer. That is incorrect. I was in fact in charge of a special platoon, rather special battalion. Question. When you advance to Pojantong Airport, of course there would be ordinary soldiers at the airport as well as the Air Force to protect the airport itself. But you said that your battle was not that fierce since there was an explosion in the area. My question is the following. Did you make any arrests of the Lon Nol Air Forces? Answer. I already responded to this kind of question this morning. There was an explosion at the back of the enemy's line. So all the soldiers, the Lon Nol soldiers at the airport surrendered their weapons, and my group was to confiscate and collect those weapons and ammunition. Question. Did you arrest those soldiers and send them to the rear? How did it happen? Can you tell us? Answer. I said that they were sent. It did not mean that my forces sent them to the rear. When there was a large explosion, and not only the soldiers, those civilians who were on foot and sometimes they were on vehicles, they were retreating through the back, and the soldiers were also sent along with them. Thank you. A number of military commanders testified before this court, and they usually refer to the Southwest Zone forces who made an intervention in the Northwest Zone. rather in the East Zone. Were you aware of other special sources from other zones who assist in this attack rather than those from the East Zone? Answer. For the East Zone, there were not only forces from the southwest, but there were also forces from other zones, including the north. There was a mixture of various forces from various zones, and I could not grasp the entire situation, because at that time, forces from other zones went there, but the southwest forces at that time were minimal. Question. I'd like to get clarification on another point. You testified before this court that before you went to the East Zone, you went for a meeting at the Mok's house in Takao, that is in the Southwest Zone. And at that time, there were main military commanders from the brigade up. And also when you were interviewed by the investigators, you stated that the meetings were only for the brigades and the divisional levels, not the regimental level. But at that time, you were in charge of the special regiment. How was it possible for you to be allowed to join that meeting? Answer. Allow me to respond to this question, as I attended the meeting in my capacity at the regimental level. In fact, the meeting was for the additional forces to the East Zone, as my regiment would be sent there. And then I were given the responsibilities over 3 more regiments. So in fact, they foresaw that I would be promoted to a brigade level, and for that reason I was allowed to join that meeting. Question, but in fact, before you went to the East, you were in charge of only a regiment, and your responsibilities were only added when you were in the East Zone. During your meeting at Tamok's house, so it means that there was a plan for you to be promoted to become a brigade commander. Is that correct? Answer, yes, it is. Question. You were in charge of soldiers in the Southwest Zone. Were you familiar with the name Chugran, who was also a military commander in the Southwest? Answer. Through my indirect knowledge, as I did not meet directly with Chugran, he was in charge of a regiment under the brigade 230, and they were at the Cambodia area. But personally, I never attended any meeting with him until the time I went to Svai Rieng. Question. While you attended the meeting with Tamok at his house, did Chugran also participate in that meeting? Answer. No, he did not, because he was only at the regimental level, and the meetings were only for the brigade and divisional commanders. Question. During the meeting at the Tamok's house, who was the chairing committee of the meeting? Answer. It was Tamok who chaired the meeting as he was in charge of the southwest zone. Question. So there was nobody else above Tamok to chair the meeting, namely Pol Pot or Son Sen? Answer. No. Question. Please respond again. Answer. I already replied that nobody else above Tamok. Thank you, Mr. Witness. That's all I have for you, but my colleague would have some questions for you. Thank you, Mr. President. President, you may proceed the International Council.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Your Honours. Good afternoon, Mr. Witness. Good afternoon, Council. Mr. Witness, I have some follow-up questions in respect of what you testified earlier today. This morning, you spoke of a universal rule, as you called it, in respect of the treatment of prisoners of war. More specifically, you said that there was a order or a rule or a policy not to mistreat Lon Nol soldiers. Lon Nol soldiers, you said, were sent to the rear when they were captured. Could you explain one more time, but this time in more detail, how you knew that such a policy or practice existed?
Allow me to respond to this question. During the heat of the battle, at that time, there was a policy, and a policy was directed from the upper echelon that a prisoner of war should not be mistreated during the battlefield. And that policy was disseminated to all the Khmer Rouge military, and it was likewise a universal rule.
Could you explain how exactly this policy was disseminated? Did it go through telegrams? Did it go through oral instructions?
First, the instruction was relayed through telegrams and through the chains of command. When we received a telegram, then we would disseminate to those under our supervision.
I know it's a long time ago, Mr. Witness, but do you recall the exact wording of those telegrams in which it was ordered not to maltreat Lon Nol soldiers?
The passage of time from 1975 to the present day has been so long. I cannot recall the exact wordings in the telegram or the telegram number. I only recall the main point of the telegram because it's been almost 40 years.
I understand that, Mr. Witness. But do you recall how you, in your turn, disseminated the order to your subordinates? How did you tell them that Lon Nol soldiers, when captured, were not to be mistreated?
The wordings and the gist were just a part of the instructions, and as I recall, there was a phrase that for every battle, and if a prisoner of war was arrested, that person shall not be mistreated. And I cannot recall the entire content of the passage because the time has passed a long time ago, since 1975.
Just to be clear, Mr. Witness, such a standing order was also in practice before 1975?
Response. So far as I remember, during each fighting or before each fighting, we were instructed by our superiors on these wordings. I think there were different wordings that we were instructed. The only thing I remember, the main points were that when prisoners of war were captured, they should not be mistreated or tortured. And every fighting had to proceed after meetings were convened. And in this meeting, such policy would then be briefed to all the soldiers.
So, Mr. Witness, is it your testimony that the order not to mistreat captured Lon Nol soldiers was repeated on numerous occasions in the period between 1970 and, let's say, 1975-76?
Response. Yes, it is correct.
Mr. Witness, notwithstanding your testimony today, there are stories that, in fact, captured Lon Nol soldiers have been executed, both before 17 April 1975 and after 17 April 1975. I think I know the answer to the question that I'm asking you, but I'm asking you anyway to be absolutely sure. Were you ever yourself, directly or indirectly, involved in execution of captured Lon Nol soldiers? So both before 17 April 1975 and after.
The President, Jury Counsel, you may now proceed. Jury Counsel Good afternoon, Mr. President and Your Honors. I'm afraid that this question is self-incriminating, and I'm afraid his response would be incriminating. The witness, the President, Jury Counsel, I think it is best if you should have consulted with your client first before you were on your feet. You may discuss with him now. The President, AV booth officers are now instructed to ensure that the microphone for the witness is activated to make sure that the chamber hears him, whether he would like to respond or not. Response. I would like to be brief on this. For my unit, either during the fighting or after the fighting, there was no execution, torture, or mistreatment of the Lone Nol soldiers. As I stated this morning, 3 months after the liberation, I was deployed to the border area, and we fully engaged in the battlefields at the border to worry about capturing the Lone Nol soldiers back here.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. A follow-up question. Were you ever ordered by your superior to execute captured Lone Nol soldiers, but refused, for instance?
Response. I wish to make this clear time and again that I personally did not receive any orders from my superiors regarding the mistreatment of the Lone Nol soldiers or the execution of the soldiers, and I belong to different levels. I rose through ranks, and I never remember having been instructed as such.
Have you, Mr. Witness, ever heard Tamok speak at meetings about execution of captured Lone Nol soldiers?
Response. No, I only met Tamok at his home when I worked in Swirien, and I never heard him instruct on killing any of the Lone Nol soldiers.
Have you ever heard Son Sen speak about the killing of captured Lone Nol soldiers?
Response. No.
Have you ever heard from other Khmer Rouge soldiers or commanders about execution of Lone Nol soldiers in the southwest zone?
Response. I believe I already said it, and I hope it's clear that I have received no orders or have ever heard anything about the execution of the Lon Nol soldiers. And once again, because I was deployed to the border area, I did not know much about what happened later on here at the back.
Ms. Witness, have you ever heard stories about the execution of Lon Nol soldiers in Southwest Zone or other zones after 1979? So not during the time that you were commander, but in the years after 1979.
Response. I have heard from other people through a hearsay that some people were executed, but in principle I never saw this.
Have you heard after 1979 through hearsay about a policy to kill Lon Nol soldiers higher than a certain rank, higher than, for instance, the rank of lieutenant?
Response. Yes, I have heard about this, but in reality, I have never been instructed by my superiors on this. It was more a hearsay, and I can't exactly say if this happened, because after 1975, 3 months after April 1975, the situation at the border was so tense, and I had to fully engage in making sure that we can perform our duty very well back at that place.
Mr. Witness, I now would like to move on to Lon Nol administration officials, civilians. Do you know if prior to 17 April 1975 a policy existed that civilian officials in the Lon Nol administration had to be executed?
Response. I may say that I have heard of this, and it is difficult for me to say whether this practice was in place because I was not experienced this myself to say more than this.
So is your testimony that you yourself or your soldiers were never involved in the execution of Lon Nol officials, civilians?
Response. It is correct. We never engaged in execution of any soldier, and that happened to me and my subordinates. We never did this.
We have been speaking earlier about a policy not to mistreat soldiers, Lon Nol soldiers. Do you know if there was a policy, an official policy, through telegrams or other instructions, what to do with former Lon Nol civilians?
Response. I once said that we received telegrams from the upper echelon through chain of command, and there were instructions, as always, that whenever prisoners of war were arrested, they must not be mistreated, tortured, or executed. They had to be sent back to the rear, and that's what the instructions we obtained.
I understand that, Mr. Witters, we have covered that subject, but my question was related to Lon Nol government or administration officials. So, not soldiers, but the treatment of Lon Nol civilians. What do you know about that?
Response. I do not even know what happened to the soldiers, the Lon Nol soldiers who would be captured in the battlefields, who had been sent back to the rear, let alone the civilians and how they were treated. I don't know about this, because whenever what happened at the rear was not to our knowledge, because we were there and we knew only what happened at the battlefront.
Have you ever heard from others about execution of former Lon Nol officials, not soldiers but officials, in the northwest zone, right after the liberation in 1975?
Response. I believe time and again I said this. After 1975, both the civilians and Lon Nol soldiers, rather officials, to the best of my knowledge, I have no idea what happened